Hi and welcome to this week's Walk the Wu Wei broadcast. It's lovely to be here as per usual. Tonight we are talking...
Tonight is the night.
Tonight is the night that we talk all about letting go of regret, guilt, and the bedfellow of guilt, shame. So we'll
Is
touch
it? Is that the bedfellow?
Well, we'll find out, won't we? We'll find out. So, regret, guilt, and shame, they're reoccurring issues, and I guess you hear those sort of issues and situations around those sort of issues in your therapy room, David.
Every day.
Every day. Okay, so give us the Wu Wei wisdom teaching on what you believe regret and guilt is.
Okay, so I think the first thing that you have to do is to do the Wu Wei model. And you have to separate whether you're talking about a feeling or a belief. So most people say, I feel guilt, I feel guilty, I feel shame, I feel regretful. So you have to identify whether you're talking about a feeling, a red light feeling, I would call it. I would much prefer to call it a red light feeling. Or are you talking about a belief or a thought? So that's the first step. Okay,
so I mean, we'll come on to, I guess, how to deal with letting go of the feelings or the beliefs of regret and guilt in the second part of this video. But I really want to kind of explore and thrash out how it affects, how these emotional states, these red light feelings affect people. I mean, when you work with clients, David, what are the typical issues people are coming to you with around regret and guilt? Is there a common theme? Or?
Yes, it will always be something as in the past. They will always open up and say, I feel guilty about this, or I really regret this, or I wish something had been the other way, or I regret I ever met this person, or I regret I ever started this job. And it's always looking back in the past. So I do what I say. Are we talking about a feeling, or are we talking about a belief?
Yeah.
So separate the belief and the feeling. So if you say, I feel guilt, that's a red light feeling. What created that feeling? Are you guilty, for instance?
Well,
we just deal with guilty.
It's like a lot of people are talking about things they've done in the past or things they haven't done.
Yeah. Or things they should have done.
And they're facts,
or
aren't they?
Oh, not
or
always. No, not always,
okay.
you see. Not always. Because they'll look back and they'll say, I should have done this. I should have done that. Wouldn't it have been better if I'd have done this? I made a mistake here. And this is where it goes wrong. Because you're looking back at it from a different point of view. So you're looking back at something you may have done when you were 18, when you were 16, when you were 10. And you're saying, well, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have, whatever. I shouldn't have spoke to my mother that way. I shouldn't have hit my brother, so, but you're looking at it from an adult point of view, and you're being judgmental about yourself. And so you're falling into the CCJ, criticizing, compare, being judgmental. And you're actually not criticizing and comparing and being judgmental about someone else. You're being judgmental about yourself. And this is what I hear a lot of the times. Wouldn't it have been better? Wouldn't it have been better if I'd have gone this way, if I'd have done this? Well, how do you know that?
But
could have been worse.
Sometimes, though, you can look back either years later or immediately, and you know it was the wrong thing to do.
Absolutely.
Whether it was the action or the inaction.
Absolutely.
So it's not you're not speculating about it, are you?
No, you're not speculating. You're not speculating on what you did, and you are looking back at what you did, and you're reviewing what you did, and you see now there are more things that you could have done. But how about at the time? You couldn't see that.
Exactly, yeah. Benefit of hindsight is a wonderful thing.
It's wonderful. Anybody can sit in hindsight and say, oh, well, you should have done that. Wouldn't it have been better if you'd have done that? Wouldn't it have been better if... Well, at the time, you probably didn't know. You probably didn't understand. You probably wasn't able to reason. And this is part of what I'm always saying. These three things here that we're talking about, and I'm sure we'll talk about more of these type of things, are so important, because this is the closest you will get to spirituality, because this is the closest that you will come to learning spiritual lessons. So, for instance, if you did something And on your reflection, you know that that was wrong. You should have done something and you didn't do it, or you did something you know you should have done.
Yeah.
Then go back and just consider why you made that choice, because that's what it was. It was a choice. With the information you had at the time, you made a choice. Try and go back and reconstruct what was leading up to that choice and why you made that choice, because it's very important. In that process lies the spiritual lesson.
Okay.
So you either thought you had no alternative. That's normally the way. I had to do this. I had no alternative.
Yeah.
You always have an alternative. There's always some other way to look at something to change your perception. Or a lot of my clients would do it and say, I never thought about it. I just did it. It was a reaction.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Take control.
Yeah.
Take self-responsibility. Yeah. And those are the spiritual lessons. Yeah. This is your life, your mind, your body. You are not perfect. You know something? Every human being, everybody, you, me, you, we only learn by getting things wrong. Everything that we've done.
If you think you're perfect,
you're going to get it wrong.
You're going to get it wrong, and then you are going to get the red light feelings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking, you're judging yourself against some hierarchical thing that you should be perfect. Someone else can get it wrong, but you can't get it wrong. Whether you're parenting, you can't get it wrong. Whether you're in a relationship, you can't get it wrong. And you can and you will get it wrong. You have to get it wrong.
Yeah.
Human beings will only learn by making mistakes. You think about it. Everything that you've done in your life, you first got it wrong. Something as simple as driving a car. You didn't jump into the car and suddenly magical start driving it, crunched your gears, forgot to look in the mirror. Now you jump in the car and you do all this thing. You drive the car, you change gear, and you listen to the radio as well. You do everything all at the same time without even thinking about it.
But you take it for granted.
And
what about, some people would say, well, you know what, I've always felt guilty for everything. Even from childhood, it's almost like I was made to feel guilty by my parents, and that kind of...
Well, you see, now you've just given me a feeling.
Yeah.
I've always felt guilty. This is a feeling.
They always blame me. They always said I was in the wrong. They always criticised me. Now I'm kind of criticising myself and feeling guilty for everything.
So you have to take responsibility. First of all, were your parents correct? Are you, everything you do, is it wrong? Now, it might be wrong in their view, because some parents have got this misguided idea that their children need to be constantly driven like a whip, and they can't congratulate them because they're lazy or something.
Yeah.
And so they keep on setting the targets higher and higher and higher. And as you reach one target, guess what they do? They lift the barrier again and they give you another target.
Yeah.
And the poor child is trying just to get some kind of pleasure or some strokes, emotional strokes from their parent. And the parent thinks that they're doing a really good job for their for their child because they're driving them forward for them to reach the best. But you know, this is wrong thinking. Yeah. And if the child says, I've always felt guilty, or I've always felt...
And I don't even know why I feel guilty. I just feel
there is a reason
it's crazy.
There.
There's a reason.
You've got to go to the belief.
Yeah.
So you're saying then, in your example, my parents were always right.
Yeah.
Well, they're not always right. They can't be always right, because then you're saying my parents are perfect. And I'm sorry, no parents are perfect. I'm a parent, and I'm far from perfect. Yeah. You know, we try our best, we make mistakes, we learn from the mistakes. If we need to apologize for the mistake, we apologize. Yeah. But sometimes we don't even have to apologize because we learn and we move on.
I mean, would you say that sometimes if we're like, as a child, if we do something wrong, obviously, because we do lots of things wrong when we're children because we're learning and growing, and we get berated or told off by our parents, that kind of telling off and the tsunami of red light, uncomfortable emotions that we experience because of that telling off, sometimes that can kind of, do you think it can kind of stay with you unless you unpack it and deal with it as an adult?
Well, it can definitely stay with you if you don't deal with it. And this is the whole essence of self-responsibility. You know, that could have happened. You could have been brought up in a very dysfunctional family, for instance, who were always criticizing you, physically hitting you, always
saying
chastising you, always telling you not good enough.
You've done that wrong,
And if that's you, then I am sorry. I'm sorry you had that childhood. But you know what? It just shows me how wonderful you are, because guess what? You got through it. How amazing are you? That's awesome. Yeah. You got through it. Don't now take it on yourself and tell yourself exactly the same foolish, wrong things that your parents told you.
Yeah.
When do you become self-responsible? When do you say, I'm sorry, they were wrong. They were wrong. And now I'm going to take control. I am going to be responsible for my self-talk, for what I say to myself. You know,
not berating myself.
Exactly. A lot of my clients, I've got to tell you, their childhood has been dysfunctional. But you know what's more dysfunctional? The way they talk to themselves. They've taken that example of their parents and they've homed it and they've made it even worse. Stop it!
I mean, I think this term guilt, it permeates a lot of the kind of media and a lot of the things we read, like in magazines and newspapers, you know, the 7 sins of like dieting, you know, and all this sort of stuff. And I think sometimes we use it, I feel guilty for this. I felt so guilty for that. We use it as a kind of in a very flippant way, but that still has an energy attached to it. So whether I guess the point I'm trying to make is whether you are harboring a deeply felt guilt or regret about something fairly serious that happened however long ago, or whether you've just got a fleeting thought and then the emotion that you're labeling as guilt just because you've done something relatively insignificant a few hours earlier, and you're telling your friends, I feel so guilty for this, it still has the same energetic effect on you and the kind of vibration you're sending out there. Would you agree?
Well said. I'd absolutely agree with you. And even as you were describing that, did you notice that Alex had to use the word felt, feel. That's why if you take anything away from here, stop saying, I feel guilty. I feel a red light. Why do I experience that red light? What is it that I'm thinking or I'm believing? If you say, well, David, I'm guilty. I'm guilty of something. Right, okay, let's unpack that now and let's have a look at what you're guilty of, because you could have made a mistake.
Yeah.
Now,
that's the fact. We do make mistakes.
Absolutely.
We do make mistakes. So we're not saying ignore the fact that you've made mistakes or you would do things differently now if you had your time again.
I mean, sometimes if I look back at some of these videos, I go, oh my goodness, I can't believe I've said that. You know, I could have said something much better, but we're humans, we're not perfect. So please make sure in your belief system that there's not this misguided belief that somehow you're perfect and everything you do should be superior and above everybody else, because that will create red light feelings. So, first of all, a red light feeling. Right, I've got a red light feeling. Why? I'm guilty. What are you guilty of? Well, I'm guilty of this. Whatever it is, I should have done this and I didn't. My next question is, golden thread now. Why? Why didn't you? Why didn't you do that? If you knew there was another way, and I can tell you what a majority, I didn't realize there was another way.
Yeah.
I didn't realize when I was 13 or 14 that there was another way. I was in a gang, or I was in this, or I did that, or I didn't realize I had that control. Okay, so do you realize now?
Yeah.
Have you learned that lesson? Because if you stay in this feeling of guilt and going round and around the carousel of despair, you'll never
no
learn.
Benefit.
No
and
benefit.
In fact, there's so many disbenefits. I mean, we've already talked about the kind of affecting your energetic vibration, but it's like this anchor of guilt or regret weighs you down. It ultimately affects your potential, doesn't it? And I guess it spirals into more self-sabotaging actions. You stop pushing people away. And
well said. You don't need me today. Do you know this well?
Yeah.
Because this is exactly what happens. It sets you up for more and more and more of the same. You're on the carousel. You're going around and around and around. How can regret guilt, and shame ever make you have good green light feelings? How can you ever feel good? Because how can it make you more confident, for instance, green light feelings? It doesn't make you less confident. It gnaws away at you.
It's
like
almost like the two can't exist together. Confidence, joy, bliss, love cannot exist whilst guilt, regret,
you're choosing to believe you're guilty. You are regretful.
It's a choice. That's so important. It's a choice.
You've got to come back down. And when you hit the choice, then it's golden thread. Why did you make that choice? Was you just doing it for whatever reason?
Or you just, for some people, it's not about, well, I didn't have the awareness or the options available. For some people, it's like, well, I just didn't prioritize speaking to that person, whether it's a member of family that you regret not speaking to about something, or whether it's an action you didn't take just because you just didn't prioritize it, because perhaps you were living more of an ego-driven mindset life at that time, whereas now you're in a different place energetically, spiritually.
And that's why I call it a spiritual lesson, because I would then ask, okay, it's good that you've recognized that now, well done. Have you learned that lesson? Is this going to happen again in the future? Because here's the crux of the matter. If you're on the carousel going round and around and round, beating yourself up, oh, I feel guilty, oh, I'm shameful, oh, I'm regretting, you keep on doing the same thing because you haven't learned the lesson. Separate the feelings from the beliefs. Trace the belief down. Find out when it happened. Ask yourself, have I learned that lesson? Will I ever do this again? Will I now change? And that really is about self-responsibility, about you taking control of your life and making the decisions that reflect the awesome person that you are. You're not perfect, but you are unique. Your journey is unique. This idea, I talk about regret for a second, this idea that I hear constantly about, wouldn't it have been better if this would have happened? Wouldn't it be better if I hadn't met him, if I hadn't done this, if I hadn't joined that company?
If I'd have spoken to them.
You didn't find out why you made those choices and learn from that lesson so you don't repeat the same thing time and time again. So you don't, and then you say, well, it's just a habit. Oh, it's ingrained. No. It's a choice that you're making without thinking about it. And spirituality is about taking responsibility for yourself and honoring yourself and respecting yourself. If you could just see how awesome you are, if you could see in you where I see in you, then you would treat yourself much differently and you'd change these beliefs and these, as Alex says, don't throw these words about like they're meaningless. They have meaning.
Because I think, if you choose to hold on to regret and guilt about any particular situation, whether it's a relationship, anything, I think it automatically then puts a cloud, a negative slant on anything to do with, say, future relationships, or it really does. Affect a lot of areas in your life.
And another way of thinking about that, as Alex said, if you think about all of these three that we're discussing today, regret, guilt and shame, they all happened in the past. So an analogy, it is like driving your car, but not looking where you're going, looking in the rear view mirror of what happened as in the past. But you're not even learning of the things that what happened with the past. Well, all you're doing is beating yourself up.
Isn't shame slightly different to regret? Because shame is more about who you believe you are as a person. You think you're a bad person in some way. Well, and that's still, if you feel ashamed, I suppose you can feel ashamed of your behaviour in the past, but a lot of people carry a kind of sense of shame with them in the present,
but then I would do the same again.
Same process.
Shame is a red light feeling. What is the thought? If it's what you said, Alex, I believe I'm a bad person. Okay, let's find out why you believe you're a bad person. Let's follow the golden thread now. And it's dead easy. You can do it yourself. Just sit quietly with a cup of tea. Why do I believe I'm a bad person? And I will absolutely guarantee it will go back into your childhood. And it will more than likely be what somebody else said to you, or you not being able to please somebody else, or you not living up to their standards.
Yeah.
You are not meant to live up to other people's standards. You're meant to live in your beliefs, your morals, your standards, your drive, your focus, what's right for you. Because if you're living by their standards, you'll never flourish. You'll never flourish because you're always looking and comparing and criticizing and being judgmental. Your eyes are off your path, your journey. For you to flourish, you have to take responsibility. If you're trying to please someone else, live up to their standards, you're not focusing on your journey.
So you've talked about doing the golden thread work. As soon as you get the red light feeling, the emotional feeling, look, which we are calling guilt, regret, or shame, you need to pause, ask yourself, what am I thinking or believing right now, which is created this feeling, and then do that golden thread work to find the deep-seated belief that's attached to whatever you're thinking and whatever's creating the emotion.
Can I give you a real life thing, which it took us about 2 or 3 sessions to work on. I had a client who, when I think they were an adolescent, she was 12 and her brother was 9, and she purposely pushed her brother because he was saying something and it was getting on her nerves. Pushed her brother down from behind. Her brother fell down and poked his eye out and was blind in one eye.
Okay. I can relate to that, something similar.
And she now, and this is like 30, 40 years later, is still carrying that guilt that her brother is blind. Her brother doesn't blame her, but she's carrying that guilt that it's her fault that she pushed her brother without thinking about it because he was mimicking her or mocking her or something. And she just pushed him. She didn't push him to damage him. She just pushed him like all children do. Yeah. And this is a typical example. Okay. This is a typical example that you've got to go back. You've got to find the incident and you've got to go through that incident. And you've got to ask her, how does a 12-year-old girl rationalize that action? How can she say that it was her fault to be guilty of that? Surely, I would put to you listening to this, for her to be guilty, she has got to know, I am now going to push my brother and he will be blind. Yeah. That will sort him out.
It has to have been, well, I mean, even if it was an intentional action to hurt the brother, you know, you're still talking about a child, really.
Exactly.
So, you know, even if, I guess, you know, some people have probably done things either intentionally for whatever reason, which were inappropriate. But now, on reflection, they look back and they feel that sense of guilt. You know, there's still this thing about accepting what you've done and letting it go and understanding that for whatever reason your mind or your beliefs were in a certain place then, but you've moved on.
Well, just to open that example out a little bit, because when we started to talk, I said to her, well, is it your brother that's saying you're guilty? She said, no. He's never said, he understood it was just boisterous play and he knew he was driving me mad and he was driving me mad on a purpose to get a reaction. No. She said, he sat down with me many times and he's begged me not to be guilty about this, but I'm still going to. What is she getting from that?
So why do people still, I mean, a lot of people have said, you know, I understand where the guilt comes from. I understand what you're saying with separate the thoughts from the feelings. I've done the self-inquiry work. I've done the golden thread work. I think I've cracked it. I understand I've got to love myself. I understand, you know, you're not talking about forgiveness. You're talking about acceptance, learning the spiritual lesson. But yet, occasionally, I still get the red light feelings pop up from nowhere, the feelings of guilt and regret.
Well,
so
you haven't learned the spiritual lesson,
okay.
and that's what we have to do.
So that means they've still not dealt with the core belief. That's right. That's still there.
So for that particular client that I'm talking about, it took us about, I don't know, 2, 3. It was quite a long time, longer than normal, because we had to go down and we had to understand that prior to that, she was having real self-doubt problems about the way she valued herself and loved herself. And what that incident did, it gave her a handle, like a stick that she could beat herself with. And right through 40 years later, she's still beating herself because that becomes familiar. She gets used to that way of thinking. It's almost like something that she can use as a justification when things go wrong. She can blame herself, and so as in a way she uses that. And we had to go back.
That's interesting.
And we had to reprogram that whole thing.
So what you're saying is that this idea of guilt or regret, people can kind of wheel it in as a kind of a stick to beat themselves with quite easily. It's like keeping it in reserve. For, I mean, I suppose some people would say, well, just when I'm getting nice, comfortable and relaxed with life, then this guilt pops up. I don't know where it's come from. I don't know, you know, but it's kind of there. It's the old friend. It kind of I wheel it in. Why do people do that?
But when you do the golden thread and when you work with a client, you find out actually. So here's another guilt I hear daily. I'm guilty about having success.
Yeah, I'm guilty about relaxing.
I'm guilty about relaxing. I'm guilty about having a good life. I'm guilty because everything's working
money,
out. Exactly. Because things shouldn't work out for me. I'm guilty about enjoying myself. And so they'll use this as a stick to beat themselves with. It's crazy.
And where does that come from?
Because it keeps them on the carousel. And what they're trying to do is to stay on the carousel of familiarity. They don't want to be criticized. Although they'll criticize themselves, they don't want other people to criticize them. They don't want other people to be judgmental. They don't want other people to compare them. They'll do it themselves because they're very worried about what other people think. It's very paradoxical, but they want to be special and slightly different. They don't like the idea that they're like us all. They're not perfect. They do make mistakes. They do get things wrong. They can't be top of the heap all of the time. And we have to learn, and they will not accept that. And they set up this very complicated mind game,
and
really.
It is like a game, isn't it? It's almost like, you know.
You know, and the funniest thing is that when you do the work, this happens to me a lot, and I've only just recognized it the last few years. When you do the work and you take it apart and you demonstrate it to it and they see it, guess what they do? They laugh. And I think, oh my goodness, this has been restricting your life all the while, and now you're laughing
and
at it.
And it's such self-sabotage.
It's self-sabotage, but they almost enjoy doing it. It's crazy.
So
Stop it!
I did, as per usual, I did a little bit of research for the video, and I came across a very interesting short video, Tony Robbins, where he was talking about guilt and shame and his techniques for dealing with it. And there was something he said which struck me because it's so kind of counter what we would teach. I'm going to read it out for you. He said, and this was specifically to do with shame, but it was talking about both areas. He says, you're never going to deal with shame. You need to overwhelm it with the good. It won't disappear by analysing it. Now, what he was suggesting was what he calls this emotional flooding technique, whereby you should only focus on the positive. You should only focus on what you're proud of. You should only focus on what you're grateful for. And it's almost like you just block out all the kind of red light feelings that you get. So block them out completely, because he's saying basically you're never going to get rid of them. Just block them out, blast them out. Now, what would you say to that?
First time I've heard that, and I think this is so great to hear somebody else's point of view. And Tony Robbins is a really famous, successful person who does coaching and self-development. Well worth listening to. And this is why taking self-responsibility is so important, because he's giving you one way of dealing with it. Why don't you listen to that and consider that? This is my way. I'm not saying I'm better. I'm not saying I'm just saying it's a different way. I don't think, what did he call it? Flooding out.
Yeah.
I don't think the flooding out works. And this is why I don't think it works. Imagine you had a backyard full of weeds, right up to your head in weeds, and you wanted to get rid of them. Well, one of the quickest ways to flood them out is to put some slabs on top of them. Within 2 hours, your backyard will be pristine. But what happens in a couple of weeks? The weeds start to come through, find their way through the cracks. And this is what happens when you do what Tony Robbins is suggesting.
What's happening,
you
just
keep
try to
flooding.
Yeah.
What I would say, paradoxically, is the opposite to him. I would look and dig the weeds up from the roots and find out. So many of my clients say this to me: how do I let go, David? And the question is, why are you holding on? You're getting a benefit from holding on.
Holding on to the belief, the regret,
to guilt,
the shame.
You're holding on to it. It's like you're grasping onto it. And we've got to find out why it is that you are holding on to that. Now, most people say, well, it's a habit. Okay, if it's a habit is just a choice set on default. Let's look at the choices you made and let's reprogram the choices so you can release the grasp. Because if you just put things on top of it and cover it down, it will always find its way through. That's my view.
Yeah.
Tony Robbins' view is different. So why don't you is that on YouTube?
Yeah, it's on a video. So
why don't you try and find that one and listen to us, listen to me? Do you agree with him or agree with me?
No, I mean, obviously, well, not obviously, I agree with the point that you can't just try to blank out, box off the thoughts and the emotions that keep the red lights reoccurring, because you may be able to do that for a day, a week, a month, a year, but it will always come back. It comes back to the carousel thing in the spiritual lesson. You know, you've got the baggage there to be dealt with. You can keep on watching it go round the carousel like the carousels in the airport and not do anything about it. You can just leave it on there and then, you know, watch it go away into the distance, but it will always come back. So at the end of the day, you've got to take the bag off, open it up and learn the lesson.
And I think it's really good, and I would really encourage you to listen to other people and self-development and find one that resonates with you. Because I would say that's the big difference between Tony Robbins and what I'm teaching. I believe what I'm teaching is coming from a spiritual perception. There is a lesson for you to learn. If you are choosing to hold on to regret, guilt and shame, there is a very important life lesson for you to learn in your life journey. And if you ignore it, it doesn't go away. It will just keep on repeating time and time again.
I think that's a great place to end, because if you reframe how the situation, the red light emotions, and say, okay, what have I got to learn here? There's a valuable spiritual lesson here that sits behind my guilt, my regret, my shame. Then it completely turns everything around. It's completely empowering, and isn't that what life's all about? To learn these spiritual lessons.
Well, you could almost make that into an affirmation. I am open to learn.
Yeah.
I am not perfect.
Yeah. I am not perfect.
I am open to learn. And you only
I will make mistakes.
Absolutely. You will make mistakes. I will make mistakes. Alex will make mistakes. You will make mistakes. This is part of the human growth. And I'm open to learn, and I'm looking for all the lessons. The Taoists believe that if you're open in this way, rather than closed off and beating yourself up, then the cosmos will step in and help you. The cosmos will guide you. It's like the teaching is it guides you through that spiritual lesson, and the spiritual lesson becomes more obvious to you that you can change your life. And then the beauty of this, if you do that, it will never return. If you hide it, avoid it, cover it over, flood it with other emotions, it will always return. So why don't you just open yourself up and stop closing yourself down? You are divine. You are awesome. Do never, never, never doubt yourself. You are allowed to make mistakes. Correct them as quickly as you understand, but remember to do that extra little bit of work and learn the lesson so you don't make them again. And then you can live a life with no regret, no guilt, no shame. Imagine what that would be like.
That is, you're saying that is absolutely possible.
Absolutely possible. No regret, no guilt, no shame, because you've rebranded those as learning situations, spiritual learning situations. So have I had spiritual learning situations? Absolutely, every day. When I'm working with my clients, they're my greatest teachers. They're giving me spiritual learning lessons. I often think, oh, I could have said that, or why didn't I say that, or I missed something there. And then I learn for the next time. And so that's how we should all do it. So there's no regret, there's no guilt, or there's no shame. It's just a spiritual learning lesson that's being offered to me. That's how I see it. It's like the universe is offering it to me. Now, I can turn my back on it and ignore it and say, I know better, I'm perfect, I always get it right. Or I can say, thank you. I'll take that into my heart, and I will now learn that lesson that you've offered to me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, David. That's lovely. So, if anyone has got any questions or comments, please post them below the video or drop us an email at info@wuweiwisdom.com, and we'd love to hear from you. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.